Welcome to Grown Between Worlds, a podcast for adult children of immigrants and the people who love them. We're here to hold real conversations about identity, belonging, love, and life across cultures.
And we're committed to creating a space that feels grounding, honest, and human. Each conversation here touches on sensitive themes, which may feel deep or tender. We invite you to listen or watch at your own pace and take good care of yourself.
I'm Forouz.
And I'm Miranda. We're so glad you're on this journey with us.
Hi, everybody. Today's guest is Nikoo Sedaghat. She is the founder of Registered Psychotherapy, a virtual practice in Ontario, Canada, supporting individual mental health and relational well-being. As a registered psychotherapist, Nikoo's work is shaped by her lived experiences as a queer, neurodivergent, diasporic Iranian who grew up in Canada as the child of first-generation immigrants. These identities inform her strong commitment to anti-oppressive practice and her belief in the transformative power of authentic connections that embrace the full spectrum of the human experience. Welcome, Nikoo. We're so happy to have you here today.
Hi, Forouz. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your personal connection to immigration.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm a child of first-gen immigrants from Iran. My parents immigrated to Canada through, Turkey, Spain, Montreal, and then eventually settled in Toronto in the late 80s. Both my sister and I were born in Toronto, raised in Mississauga. And actually, when I was 10, I experienced migration firsthand when my family and I moved to Iran and lived in Tehran for about 2 years, just under 2 years. And so, yeah, that was an experience where my sister and I attended an international school. And I have a lot to say about that. But immigration is, I feel like, something that influences every aspect of who I am, being a child of adult immigrants and also having navigated it myself. And most of my family is Iranian, diasporic as well. So they are all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, that's really cool. So you have like this perspective of being born into a first generation immigrant family, but then immigrating with them to the country of origin and having a few years of experience there. So you have that experience yourself of immigration. So
Yeah.
as you're looking back on these experiences, I think both being a child of immigrants here in Canada, but then having that immigration experience in Iran for a few years, what do you feel was the hardest part for you to fit into these different contexts? And on the other hand, what was the easiest?
It's such a good question because, I think as kids, our understanding, our developing understanding of who we are is a lot of what's reflected back to us. Um, and so, depending on the context I was in, I was learning that the perceptions that people had of me or my family were going to be very different. So, within, the Iranian culture, and even outside of that, growing up in Canada, there was a lot of value placed on physical proximity to whiteness.
Hmm.
I think you could probably attest to the fact that Iranians are not immune to colorism or anti-Black racism.
Hmm.
And as a white passing person, that always felt really complex to me. In the Persian world, you don't look Iranian at all was almost given as this strange, you should take this as a compliment type of commentary. And it was often said by other Iranians, usually Iranian adults, who were, in some ways, the Iranians have a way of pairing compliments with comparisons. So it was often, your hair is so much straighter than my daughter's. And I would say, in a way, that my identity around being Iranian or even being a person of color was really mixed in with this idea of but you don't look as Iranian, and this idea that, the closer I am to these white beauty standards, the better it seems like it is. But then you go into the rest of the world and in school, and but you're not actually as white as the Persians make you seem as you are, and your unibrow actually kind of, what's the word, outs you a bit. I have a special interest around colorism and racism and racialization of Iranian people. So I can go off on that, but I'll pause for a second.
Yeah, I love that you kind of brought this point forward because I think it's something that definitely I've noticed and lived through. And have kind of been grappling with, I think, most of my life as well, including even when I was living in Iran as a child before we immigrated. Because in like the Iranian context, I'm like ethnically mixed. My father's side are from like central Iran, like in the desert areas, and then my mother's side are actually Azerbaijani Turks who had immigrated into Iran a couple of generations ago. And so there was also like that battle already there by being in this like mixed ethnic identity living in Iran, and like hearing messaging around like make sure you stay out of the sun, otherwise you're going to be
Mhm.
kind of darker, like maybe your father's side. Or when visiting kind of my father's part of the world, part of the country, where they have more like olive skin and brown skin, that my perceived whiteness was similar to yours, like really praised and seen as like beautiful. And it wasn't an experience that I had of myself as being kind of beautiful, but it was very, very, very strange. And I think even when we immigrated here to Canada, this like idea of like Iranians perceiving themselves as um, white Aryans, even though we're so ethnically mixed,
Yes.
and where we are positioned geographically, we have been on multitudes of trade routes, and have colonized and been colonized for thousands of years. And so there's just so much, um, genetic mixing and racial and ethnic mixing, cultural mixing that's happened just in that area of the world, that it was like perplexing to me. But I didn't know that I wasn't white until I immigrated here. And again, it was through peers that I came to learn that I wasn't white. And it wasn't until also when I went to university and started studying cultural anthropology that I was exposed to this like idea of race as something that is socially constructed,
Yes.
right? And yeah, it's really interesting that that concept, that experience is something that permeates well into childhood.
Yes, so strongly. And then you find, at least I found myself having different reactions depending on who that messaging came from. Like
Hmm.
when that, when a peer would say, a non-Iranian peer would say, "Oh, I would have never guessed you were Iranian," it would infuriate me in a different way than when an Iranian would say it, because I knew that that was coming from this idea of Iranians being a monolith, being one ethnicity, one race. But like you're saying, there's so much ethnic and cultural diversity in Iran. So there's this like, feel like Iranians have this unique, maybe it's not unique, but experience of holding protection for their culture of origin in a way that, like, when I heard you don't look Iranian, I want to fight back.
Hmm.
I wanna say, "Well, what does an Iranian look like to you?" I could literally feel the, like, layers of propaganda and racism that fueled that statement of, "Oh, wow. I couldn't imagine you to be Iranian." Oh.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think an aspect of that is also that when you're labeled as you don't look Iranian enough, or because of your mannerism or etc., like your life choices, you might not be Iranian enough, whether that's perceived by Iranians themselves or by non-Iranians. What is under threat is the loss of belonging,
Mhm.
right? And so of course it's going to like activate that like protective mechanism and drive in you.
Mhm. That's such a great way to put it. Exactly that, like, balance between authenticity and acceptance. Like, okay, well, if I'm not being perceived authentically here, but I'm experiencing a level of belonging or just like assimilation, even based on my proximity to white physical standards.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it's important to also note that, like, being white passing, or if we want to call it racially ambiguous, also meant that I held a lot of privilege, and I could like code switch or hide in some ways behind being white passing. And obviously, as a young kid, that came from a lot of shame. That came from um, Islamophobia
Hmm.
post 9/11.
Yes.
Hiding that felt like, or withholding that I'm Iranian and saying I'm Persian instead, or withholding the fact that I grew up in a Muslim household were ways that I protected myself from being seen as the monolith of those Middle Easterns over there.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I had the same experience, I think. When 9/11 happened, I was an adolescent. It had been a few years since we had immigrated. Um, and I've had this conversation with a few of the other guests as well. This vivid memory of having this conversation with my parents around the importance of not mentioning that I'm Iranian or that we're Iranian. We don't need to say where we're from at all, just to kind of like protect ourselves from um, the discrimination and a lot of the violence that was really starting to grow at that time, particularly in North America, but in other Western European countries, in Australia, New Zealand, elsewhere in the world as well. And the other interesting thing for me was that, like, unlike you, I didn't grow up in a Muslim family or Muslim household, at least, like within my own immediate family. Um, and so the experience of Islamophobia was very weird for me. 'Cause it felt like I'm being misperceived, like you were
Yeah.
mentioning a little bit earlier. It's like, well, I'm not a practicing Muslim. I'm aware of Islam. I grew up for a few years and under like a theocratic regime, and so I went to school and veiled in school and things like that for the few years, in childhood when I was in Iran. But myself and my family are not practicing Muslims, so why is the Islamophobia being
Mhm.
targeted at me or at my family, for instance?
Yeah. Well, there's like a racialization of being Muslim or coming from a um Muslim country. I mean, our theocracy right now. And yeah, it's so interesting. The Islamophobia within, I think, can't like it can't be disentangled for the majority of Iranian diasporans who don't want the Islamic regime in Iran right now. So I think about that conflation of the trauma, the generational trauma that folks have been experiencing under this regime, and how hatred towards the regime has kind of influenced Islamophobic rhetoric and beliefs, when really what I'm hearing from Iranians, and I had a lot of conversations with clients during the women life freedom movement, where they would say things like, I'm really struggling at work, kind of going business as usual when all these things are going on in Iran, or
Mhm,
even more recently. And I'd say, well, like, do you talk to peers about that? Like, are your colleagues asking? And often they'd say things like, no, I don't want to bring it up because I don't want Iran to be painted as this like conflict ridden, war torn type of place.
mm,
I found it really interesting that we're kind of holding this responsibility to position our country and our culture in a way that's again seen um accurately. And in that positioning, I think Islamophobia often comes up too, to be like, well, that's not Iran. The regime is not the people.
mhm.
Um, do you find that kind of like positioning or this responsibility to, I mean, I've heard this from my parents a lot too, where you see these Instagram reels of Iran pre-revolution, and there's this like pride in that. And I think, yes, there's pride in who we were, but there's also a lot of disdain for where things are at now. And then that gets mixed in with disdain towards the wrong people.
Mhm. It's a complicated history, even within the last, like, 100 years. It is a
Yeah.
very, very complicated history. And what I'm hearing you touch on is a couple of things. One, I think you're referencing kind of the nostalgia even to the pre-revolution era, where there must have been things going on why people decided to have a revolution in the first
Yeah.
place. So, yes, we can, like, experience nostalgia for and nostalgia is so selective, right? That we pick and choose these parts of this past experience that felt really joyful, felt like it had a lot of like freedom as a part of it, had maybe a lot of like movement in it. Um, but in only focusing on those experiences from the past, from the perspective of nostalgia, is we're missing so much of the other nuance of what was happening in this society, what was happening geopolitically that led the people of Iran nearly like 50 years ago to engage in a revolution, right? So I don't want to discount that because people's lives were lost. People's like families were like fractured and sometimes erased, right? Like there was a lot that the people kind of gave of themselves to try and bring forth change. I think revolution, and I'm not a political scientist, I'm not a historian, so by all means, take whatever I say with a grain of salt, please.
Ditto.
um, like revolution is just such a chaotic experience, right? And such a chaotic time that um, there's usually very little kind of clarity and certainty of exactly what's going to happen during and after, right? And so that brings me to the other point that you were making of that I think a lot of Iranians, especially in diaspora, but in my conversations with folks who lived in Iran or more recently have come from Iran, there is this kind of like protectiveness of a different version of perceiving Iranians than I think the Western world has seen as a result of the impact of the theocratic regime and state on the culture, on the people, on international kind of relations and things like that. That it's almost like we're in this like holding pattern of like, we're not this, we're not all this, but I don't have like full evidence to show you what the full nuance of who we are is because that information is not accessible outside of our diaspora community or outside of our country. Maybe all I have access to is maybe I can kind of like show you some of the images of life before the revolution, like under the Shah, to kind of say like, this is what we were and we want to try and get back to, but is it exactly what we're trying to get back to? Or what are we trying to kind of like achieve? And I think unless we're actually the people on the ground living in Iran right now and who are fighting for their rights, we can't really assume or completely and accurately understand exactly what their experiences are, the nuances of that, what their needs are, what specific rights and what expressions of those rights they are kind of fighting for. Yeah, I don't want to make assumptions because I'm not on the ground and I haven't been in the country for over a decade. And I want to give them the right and the space and the opportunity to forge what they want and need the society to be for them moving forward.
Yes. You said that so beautifully, and I'm there with you. Like they know best what they're needing, and it's when you bring up not being there. That was part of the reason why my parents decided let's move back to Iran, or well, for me, move to Iran, was exactly that. My mom's like, there's an embodied experience of being there that I want you to access. That as much as Iranian as we are out here in Canada and celebrating Nowruz and being around family, there is an embodied experience that you don't have and that they wanted us to have. And oh boy, did I feel that embodied experience when I was there. Like it was incredibly enriching to be able to hold that both and of what Iran is and what the theocracy is, what joy is in our community and what celebration looks like and how it fills the streets. So the beauty of just like being surrounded by people who you don't have to explain yourself to. It was an invaluable experience. I would also say that like the what you said about the both and you never quite fit here, you're never quite fitting there. I think a lot of the challenges I had with fitting in growing up were connected to what I was or wasn't allowed to do. And parents had a much bigger role in what I was allowed and not allowed to do than my white peers were. So, you're not allowed to go to sleepovers, or you can't go to the cottage with your friends. And, like, obviously, when I was younger, that would just infuriate me, but now reflecting back, I just think about the chaos of revolution, like you said, the chaos of immigration, and my parents just trying to keep a little bit of containment on that
Mhm.
chaos and offer protection.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
protective response is often what we see when folks go through any experience of trauma,
Mhm.
right? But experiences of trauma of going through revolution, going through war, going through displacement of immigration, those are really significant, especially because like they displacement from as a result of immigration in particular, like uh it disconnects you from the rootedness that you can experience to the land, right? So your parents kind
Yes.
of like taking you back to Iran for a couple of years. That embodied experience that you're talking about, I think also has something to do with connection to the actual like physical land itself,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That I think I've understood so much more as an adult through learning about the indigenous peoples across like Turtle Island in Canada, where we are in particular, um, and their fight for the right to have connection and sovereignty over this land that they have been on
Mhm.
for thousands upon thousands of years. Right. So it's helped me understand even my own immigration experience and others' immigration experience, that this connection from geographic and like physical land and geography and landscape.
Is huge. Yes. Yes. And to think of all of us who, I have a lot of cousins who have never even been to Iran. And so that connection to the land, or that disconnection from the land, it has a detrimental impact on our connection to culture when we've lost that connection to land.
Mhm. Yeah. Did you do any traveling around Iran when you were there for those couple of years?
Yeah, so we did go up north, quite a bit to a family cottage that's been in the family for, like, 3 generations now. Um, but I was also 10, so when my parents were going to Shiraz or they were traveling, to different provinces in Iran, my, idea of a fun time was staying at home with my cousins, so I didn't get to visit a lot, and now looking back, I'm like, "Why not?" But yeah, like, just the level of like, Iran is so big, and
Mhm.
there's so much more to see, so a little bit of travel, but not enough as an adult looking back.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense too, because you were very young and of course, like play is the priority.
Totally.
And the connections you form and what you learn through play.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that makes sense. Yeah. Um, I don't remember as much of the traveling I did before we left Iran, and we frankly didn't do too much just because of like the economic circumstances that we were in as well. Um, in the few times, and it's only been like less than a handful of times that I've gone back to Iran as an adolescent or in adulthood, I've had some more opportunities to kind of travel. And I think going up north is such a common thing that a lot of Iranians enjoy because, that's where you can access the lush greenery and the large
Mhm.
mountains and,
See the blue sky.
see the blue skies and see the Caspian Sea and all the like rivers, like it is like cooler, damp weather. It's I think a huge like favorite spot for a lot of Iranians. But I was also able to kind of like travel to the south, like near the Gulf, and being able to kind of be exposed to and see the experience of the ethnic and cultural communities that live in the south, and including kind of that they looked different than
Mhm.
me and my family, right? That their skin tones are different, definitely like olive skin tones and brown skin and black skin even, and there is a lot more kind of like Arab influence in that region as well, and it was beautiful, it was interesting, a lot of spicy food, which my stomach was not used to.
Yes. I go um, common belief is that all Iranian food is spicy. No.
No, most Iranian food is not spicy. I think we incorporate a lot more like salty, sour flavors. I think in our cuisine in different, I mean, at least different regions. I remember my favorite part, and like also I think is influenced by just like my interest in cultures and in like ancient history in particular. My favorite part was, I think, like going to Shiraz and being able to kind of go to the Persepolis, like ruins, the ancient ruins. And I remember being very conscious of the fact that a lot of Iranians use particularly that region of Iran, these particular ruins, as a connection to a very distant past of particularly like monarchy, being a part of it, part of like our culture, and identifying as Persians as because of this connection. And I remember like trying to hold that apart from like the experience that I was having, because I didn't want it to be colored by what I was hearing growing up in the diaspora, in the Iranian diaspora, which I hadn't honestly heard before I immigrated to Canada from Iran. This like focus on this like very, very ancient past and the nostalgia for this like very, very ancient past as informing where like the society should be now or should be moving towards.
Yeah.
But it was beautiful. It was just beautiful to be on that site and to kind of connect to a long history of people being in that region of the world, people that were ancestors of ours, right? And for whatever reason, I always find it a lot easier to connect to ancestry in a very ancient way than in a more like recent like history. Like it's a lot easier for me to kind of like connect in an ancient way. I love going to ancient ruins all over the world. Like I get so emotional when I visit ancient ruins around the world. I totally geek out as well.
I love this for you. Oh, can you talk more about that like connection to like ancestors, like ancient ancestors, more so than like maybe even closer generations before you?
It felt so much more spiritual, to be honest. Like I felt it not in like my conscious mind. I felt it like in my heart. I felt it in my body. I heard it like in the sound of the wind moving the sand through the ruins. It felt like this like collective wisdom, like connecting to a collective wisdom, not any particular people or particular generations, but of a collective wisdom. So I think I get so emotional in ancient sites because I feel like I'm connecting to this like collective wisdom of that region of the world, and how spiritual that feels for me.
That's so beautifully said. Yeah. Feeling that in your body. Yeah, that was part of how important it felt to live in Iran. And you mentioned play before. Like playing as a kid there looked I mean, it looked the same, but it looked different in the sense that because we're just like like we were pouring out on the streets. We were in a way like the nostalgia that my parents held on to from their own childhoods pre-revolution, they could see that coming. And on a spiritual level, like I think that was healing for them to be able to witness their kids experience play that looked like that, or to be able to joke in Farsi or develop comebacks that are snarky that I would have never had if I wasn't around other snarky 10-year-olds at that time. So the spiritual aspect of it, I think, is so important. And I think I developed a lot more like closeness and understanding with my own parents of how much of a shift and struggle it was to assimilate, to have to kind of compartmentalize aspects of who and how they are to survive here. Like you were saying earlier, being told, hey, let's not mention that we're Iranian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that brings me to my next question for you. What for you stands out the most about your experience of kind of code switching between different spaces or communities? And how has that impacted kind of your identity formation, do you feel, or how you see yourself, your overall well being across your life?
Mm. I think that, like, I can kind of categorize it in different periods of my life. I think when I was younger, that code switching involved a lot of just like pretty rigid masking and like I mentioned, withholding information about who I was. And, you know, instead of saying, hey, I'm not allowed to do that, I'd find ways to be like, well, I got in trouble. So I'm not allowed to do that because I'm being punished right now. Because God
Mm,
forbid it was my parents don't want me to do that.
mhm,
That wasn't something that felt Western enough or valid enough. It would be, well, why don't you ask again? Or why don't you push back? And so I had to learn ways to kind of translate the cultural gap between my family of origin and my experience with my peers. And translating sometimes meant lying, sometimes
mhm.
meant tweaking the truth to make it more digestible for them so that I also wouldn't be bombarded with follow up questions. Does that make sense? That,
Yeah, yeah. Because it's not kind of like it's not culturally acceptable in a more individualistic society,
yes.
especially in a society where particular practices like sleepovers and going to cottages with friends is more accepted. And I don't necessarily think that the experience of all white people or
Mm-hmm.
all people who have been in North America or other like host countries for immigrants for several generations. I don't think it's that um generalized. But yeah, I remember having those conversations too, right? There's like this protectiveness of family and of tradition and of culture and not wanting like one's culture to be seen as like closed-minded or too traditional or
Patriarchal,
patriarchal
oppressive.
or you don't have freedom, especially as a
Mhm.
girl, right? It's like do those elements exist? 100% they do.
100%, yep.
Yes. But they're not necessarily the main thing coming up in the parents' decision to allow you to go to a sleepover or not,
Yes.
right? Um, yeah, and it's hard to kind of translate that to peers, especially at a younger age, because I think I should speak for myself. I felt in my body, I understood why, but I couldn't necessarily fully conceptualize all the nuances and then be able to like articulate and
Yes.
communicate it, especially to other peers, like why.
Mhm. And, like, quite frankly, there was probably not a lot of space to do that, you know? We
No.
weren't it's not like we were being asked questions about, "Hey, why?" So at like, I agree with you about the overwhelm with all the nuances that we wanna be able to fit, in those moments of explaining why something looks the way it does, or as a kid, I would say, you know, I learned to kind of fragment parts of myself instead of integrate those parts of myself because the context encouraged that. The context kept saying, "Those parts are weird," or "Those parts aren't welcome." Or it just felt like those parts were a little bit too complicated or would have, like I was saying earlier, like would have these follow-up questions that weren't questions. They were microaggressions. It wasn't
Judgments.
until judgments, yeah.
Mhm.
It wasn't until much later where I was like, "Oh, that's why these things hurt and sting. These are those microaggressions we've been exposed to that I've even if I wasn't a direct recipient of these microaggressions, I've witnessed my parents experience that. As for me as an adult child of immigrants, like that protective factor over culture, family, over the reasoning behind why we do things has always been a pretty big motivating factor. I think now I don't care as much to prove to people who don't want to learn or don't hold that cultural humility, but I can notice it in my body a little more, that knee jerk response of like,
Mhm.
um, is this someone that I can explore that nuance with and not be met with those microaggressions?
Mhm. Yeah. I felt like I could have these conversations more with other peers across my life, but especially kind of like from like high school onwards, with other peers who also were from immigrant backgrounds, whether they were first generation immigrant kids like myself or they were born into immigrant families that had settled. It was easier to have like these more nuanced conversations with them, both to kind of like make fun, but also to like get angry about the parts that really did feel unfair within family, within culture, like felt limiting, but with nuance, right? And with kind of what felt like more like a privacy, like boundaries, right? That even if there were some thoughts or comments or perceptions that could be felt as judgmental between us, that we could hold that together. We can talk about it. We can come back to it, right? Because we could kind of like, we had this kind of sense of collective experience or a shared experience of being othered, knowing that our families were othered and that they were different. And wanting to be, like you said, protective of family, of culture, and heritage, while also needing sometimes desperately the space to be able to talk about the aspects of it that still did feel limiting for different reasons for either for any of us, especially because we all have intersectional identities, right? So certain pieces of a culture might not negatively impact most people, but if you have a different identity, like if you're queer, if you're neurodivergent within that culture, like it could land differently for you, right? So I felt like there was more of that safety and privacy and um, compassion to be able to have those conversations with other peers who are also of immigrant backgrounds and not necessarily at all from Iranian immigrant backgrounds, but just from immigrant backgrounds.
Yes. I think that draws me to like, I love working clinically with Iranian folks or other adult children of immigrants because of that same like container that you were describing, that where those critiques can be made and you're not worried about being painted with this like one single brush. And there are a lot of critiques. I think a lot of my clinical work with Iranian clients is around like unpacking narratives and unlearning how, like we spent the first little bit of this podcast talking about beauty standards and Eurocentric beauty standards. And as a sex therapist, like I am constantly working with folks to recognize the impact that culture has had. And I mean culture as in a layered way has had on their experience of their self-image, of their
Mhm,
connection with desire
mhm,
or to be desired. So going back to your question of code switching, there's also this idea of like what is desirable, what was desirable as a teen in my peer context wasn't what was desirable within my family of origin and what, being a good girl looked like. So we hold these complexities and then we're in adult relationships and we're like, wait, intimacy isn't feeling as good for me. It's like, well, yeah, we've got quite a complex and tainted relationship with our own bodies, with our own desirability, and desirability is political, is racial. So again, like these are things that as an adult I can name, but as a young person, you're just moving between these like ways of being. And I would often question, like, am I authentic enough? Am I being myself? And I would criticize myself in moments where I wasn't feeling as aligned or authentic to who I was. And now it's like, well, that was strategy, was code switching was required.
yeah, yeah, I hear you. I think I talk with clients a lot about this as well, and particularly the impacts that it has on their self-image, their body image, their connection to their body, and then therefore their connection to desire and pleasure and intimacy of all forms, but especially on a physical sexual level as well. I often joke my experience growing up, you know, amongst Iranians in one way or another. I often joke that I felt like, I mean, the Iranian elders, whether in Iran or in the diaspora, they speak to you as if you don't own a mirror.
That is, for, I need to clap for you on that one. Yes. Yes.
like almost instantaneously as soon as they see you, like there's comments being made about hair, about skin, about body size and shape and the clothing choices that you've made and how it's sitting right or not sitting right. Or it like it almost feels like instantaneous. It's like, hi, how are you? The hugs and kisses, and then a comment made about, your physicality. I felt like from a young age, I was like, do they not think that I own a mirror?
Yes. It's like, thank you for stating that fact. Similar to that example before, like, oh, your hair is lighter than my daughter's is. What am I supposed to do with that fact?
Mhm.
What is your daughter supposed to do with that fact now?
Yeah.
Like,
If anything, it can kind of actually create more of a rupture between you and that daughter.
that is a really big piece. Like, as kids, and I would describe myself as a pretty highly sensitive kiddo growing up, like, not only was I, receiving, let's say, this praise or this unsolicited piece of critique about my body, or my appearance, and I was kind of hyper aware of how that was being received by the person that compliment or critique was not targeted towards. And there was way more harm on my olive tone skin cousins or my brown cousins. There was way more harm on them when they would hear compliments towards my skin tone than it was ever harmful on me, of course. But it does create this rupture of, you are, as the adult here, positioning us in competition
Mhm.
with one another around things that we have no control over.
Or if we do have control over it. I mean, I think it was all, I don't know about your experience, but for me, it felt like I was consistently getting the message that I do have control over it, but I'm not doing enough
Yes,
to
I think
exert
that's fair.
control over it, right?
Yes.
Like, um, I'm in a larger body. I'm in a fat body, and I'm in a body that's chronically ill. It lives with PCOS. There are certain aspects of how my body functions and how my body changes in size that I don't have like complete control over. Right. And so my weight fluctuated throughout my life, including in my adolescence to a degree. And I felt like I was consistently getting the message that I'm not doing enough to exert control and to be able to kind of like fit in to the beauty standards. And I think I was shocked and in some ways maybe disappointed as a kid kind of growing up later in the diaspora that we had adopted like this North American and Western European like diet culture. And you're talking about kind of like the rupture that it can cause between you and a cousin or a family friend who's your peer when these comments are made about your appearance compared to theirs. For me, I felt like it started to actually like disconnect me from and create ruptures from me wanting to connect with the Iranian community, period, because of the body that I'm in. That I felt like, well, it's immediately going to be pointed out. And even if it's not spoken, I can tell that they're noticing it and that they have some kind of thought about it. So maybe I shouldn't put myself in those situations then. Maybe I shouldn't go to that event. Maybe I shouldn't go to that Iranian restaurant or that like Iranian store. If I do, make sure like it's quick in and out, right? And be mindful of like what I'm buying because people are judging me based on my body size and like the things that I'm buying, including from like going to shop for Nowruz for Iranian New Year. Like you're meant to kind of like buy pastries and things like that, but when you're in a body that's larger, people are perceiving that in a different way, right? So um, that I think has been a very, very like sad and frustrating experience.
It is sad. The constant commentary has always baffled me. And like, you're speaking from the perspective of body size. And I think like fat phobia is just like, I mean, we can't escape it, but in my family of origin and my extended family, like you're saying, it was the same kind of evaluation, constant evaluation. I'm often baffled by the permission that Iranian elders around me, or just even random family friends that I might meet at gatherings, the permission they give themselves to make comments about body, and actually how much it's seen as this expression of concern or
Especially about
care,
health.
health. Oh
Oh,
yeah, oh yeah.
fat
No, it's
phobia presented as a health-related concern.
yes. No, it's not actually your body. I'm just worried about your health. Well, you know, as the person who has received all these messages all your life about how you're valued based on size, that it isn't about health. If it was about health, there would be that question of like, how are you? You know, there have been periods of time in my life. I've had complicated relationships with food and my own body and fluctuations in weight, and standards always, like you said, felt out of reach. If weight gain had happened, that would be acknowledged. If weight loss had happened, it would be concern or praise. Yes.
Praise,
Oh,
right?
yes. And praise was often met with, like you're saying, like, see, they had the control and they took the control, right?
Like, there's, like, a moral like, evaluation. Like,
Yes.
yeah, there's morality comes into it, that I'm conscious of the fact that, like, some people might listen to this and be like, "Oh, well, you're kind of, like, poo-pooing on your own culture and people." And I think really the point I want to make is that diet culture has permeated almost every culture and society all over the world,
Hmm.
especially in a globalized world where we have access to information now everywhere. And it's about what is being prioritized by which kind of societies that are seen as, having more power, especially in North American cultures, like from the States, from parts of like Western Europe, that a lot of this messaging came and spread through the world from these particular regions in the world. It's permeated everyone. It's not just Iranians in Iran or in the diaspora that have internalized diet culture, and whether they're conscious of it or not, are engaging in like fat phobic attitudes and statements and behavior and monitoring of one another and policing of one another,
Mhm.
right? That it's kind of it's pervasive.
It's pervasive. Yes, and it has a very real impact on our nervous systems as well, and like you were saying earlier, that wanting to pull away from certain contexts, certain social contexts, because, your nervous system knew when I'm not in that context, things feel a little safer.
Mhm.
Um, and speaking on, like, poo-pooing a bit, like, I really do wanna give some, like, acknowledgement here for, like, even my, like, the culture within my immediate family of origin, like, the level of openness my parents have demonstrated towards being challenged by, "Hey, when you make comments about my body like that, not only is it rooted in fat phobia, but it doesn't actually help my health at all, and that doesn't feel good." And I'm proud of my parents for being able to slow down enough and not say, "Oh, but we just care." For them to
Mhm.
say, "Oh, wait, that way of showing care actually isn't what you need." So I wanna give a little, like, shout out actually to the level
Yeah.
of work that is being done in our communities and within our connections to Iranian folks.
Yeah, you're right. And I appreciate you kind of naming that, because I think on a micro level within the different like connections and families within the Iranian diaspora um that we're a part of, that is happening, right? And in particular because their immigrant children have now become adults and have access to different perspectives and information that they bring into those conversations. And the power dynamics are starting to shift in our
Yeah.
families as we get older, right? Particularly, I think, as we become more educated, which education, as I'm sure we'll talk about, is you know, such a highly valued experience and accomplishment within Iranian
Mhm.
communities and culture. Um, that as we gain more education and knowledge and experience, like there is this like shift in power dynamics that's starting to happen between us and our elders.
Yes.
And the more kind of challenging that we're doing, or like practice of assertiveness that we're doing. And I'm sure it's kind of like at different times by different elders perceived or received and experienced as disrespectful,
Yep.
because there is kind of a culture of respecting one's elders as well. But there, I have seen in small ways over time as well, elders kind of like practicing opening their minds, opening their hearts to a different perspective, particularly because they can see that it is causing harm to their children, maybe their grandchildren, and they they want to prioritize sustaining those connections and containing and sustaining their community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that is important to acknowledge that we are having a lot of these conversations, and the shift in power dynamics also comes with its own growing pains as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So talking about education,
Mhm.
what does success mean to you as an adult child of immigrants? What influenced that definition? Has it shifted?
Mm. Oh, yes. Has it shifted? Absolutely. What influenced that definition? I would say early on, like academic achievement
Hmm.
was really important. And I would say I didn't try really hard at school until about high school and in undergrad, but that level of, push through, if you can push through, if you can work hard and get to the other side, that was deemed success, which makes a lot of sense when you think about a successful immigrant story.
Hmm.
It's, getting through, settling, um, assimilating, and achieving. Right.
Hmm.
So I would say that definition of success, it wasn't like that definition was explicitly passed on, but I would witness the way that my parents, as a middle class family, were working so hard, and they never complained. They would just do it. Um, and this idea that, like, once enough academic achievement is reached, then you're kind of guaranteed stability. My
Hmm.
parents always wanted higher education for me, and their messaging was because we know that that'll secure good things for you. Right? Or we didn't get a chance to do that because we were 20 somethings when we moved over here. That was the early definition until I'd say I like had a few bouts of burning out, and realized that what I need my definition of success to be is alignment, alignment with self, alignment with my values, and also just like alignment in my nervous system. That feeling of go, go, go was actually like it lived in my body because of what generations before me have navigated, because push and fight were the gears that my ancestors' nervous systems were in. But then I was given an opportunity. I was born and raised here where access to education looked different, and so you also feel like you don't want to squander this opportunity. Yeah, does that answer that question of where I've been with success and where I'm at now?
Yeah, I hear you. I think academic achievement and success, and then subsequently career achievement and
Mhm.
success was something that I was kind of raised with as well. And probably the thing that I got the most praise for in my immediate and my extended family. And so it kind of was like positively reinforced over and over and over again. It became this like perpetuating thing.
Mhm.
Um, and now for me, that was a good fit because I liked school. I liked learning. I liked, doing well. I wanted to keep learning. I still want to keep learning. if anything, my spouse constantly like kind of jokes that like I spend way too much time and money buying professional development courses. I'm always doing a course, at least one, usually more than one per year. Well, again, it's praised, right? It's
Right.
socially praised.
Yeah.
It's like, positively reinforced. It's seen as, functional and positive, etc. Right? So yeah, I think my definition of success has very much included that. And similarly to you, significant experiences of burnout multiple times throughout my adult life, starting, in the early years of university, even has forced me to have to like reevaluate that as an adult. And it's an ongoing process of like reevaluation
Mm.
and consideration of what that definition could mean, could include, and how softening that definition or making that definition kind of more nuanced and multifaceted could actually bring more balance, more safety, more joy into my life, right? So that my nervous system doesn't have to like constantly be on, right?
Mhm.
That it can kind of like learn to settle. I think where my definition of success actually started to become complicated was going into university because um I've talked to other guests about this as well. I struggled socially a lot when I was younger. So I didn't really have friends until high school, and even then they it was just like a handful of folks. And so in university, kind of being exposed to like a larger community and choosing to go to a university that the rest of my friends weren't going to forced me to have to like try to make friends. I was working part-time at the time. I was volunteering because you were expected to do all these different
Mm.
things, like right, to kind of like build your CV. And if you want to like apply for grad school after undergrad, you got to do this from early on, right? Um, that trying to juggle all of these different things that I didn't have to juggle when I was younger, including when I was in high school, where the priority was for me to like go to school, come home, study, help out with chores. But I wasn't super social, so I wasn't like really even like going out. I'm very much a homebody, so
Mhm.
you know, I wasn't really doing what most of my peers would maybe have been doing. That exposure to a larger experience of life and a more multifaceted experience of life really started to complicate my definition of success because I couldn't keep up in the
Yeah.
exact same way with the achievement. Like I had to work so much harder, and I was on overdrive trying to balance all of these things and trying to do all of them quote unquote perfectly.
Mhm.
Um, that I was just burning myself out over and over again. And then of course that looking back, I wish my experiences of neurodivergence would have been recognized, so that I could be assessed and diagnosed and access like accommodations that would have significantly improved, I think, my mental health and my physical health in university. But I just wasn't aware of it until even a couple of years ago.
Mhm. Oh, and I can relate. I
Yeah.
can relate to that. You said I couldn't keep up, and I think that that's that felt experience of the drive to keep going, but you can't anymore. And with that layer of neurodivergence, for me, it looked the same during university, where it was, um, I- I'm not doing this well. I'm not able to juggle the social and the studying and the maintaining family connections and the this. Um, so if success means just like getting and like having that high GPA and getting into grad school, I'm just going to put my head down and do that, which meant a lot of isolation at
Hmm.
that point. Um, and that like tuning out of a lot that actually I needed. Like I needed that connection. I needed spaces for just play and creativity over studying and working. So in a way, like I was doing the successful thing. I was putting my head down, and that was praise too. Like oh, she hasn't come out of her bedroom in 5 hours because she's been studying.
Yeah,
And
what
it's like, oh,
perseverance.
yes, yes. She hasn't had a sip of water in 4 hours. Great.
What a survivor.
What a survivor. Exactly. So then
She'll
how,
go far, assuming she doesn't fall down.
assuming she makes it past this exam season, she's got it. Yeah. So to come back to your point of like reevaluating, I was pretty burnt out at that point, so I had to reevaluate. And um, throughout my life, I've had to pause and reevaluate. And the most recent experience being currently where I'm taking a leave from clinical facing work right now, and that was the same kind of thing: neurodivergent burnout and trying to hold too much. And so the reevaluation more recently has been, if success for me is not about sacrificing or being the martyr who gets the medal for not leaving the room for 5 hours, then like what is it internally? Okay, internally it's when I can slow down enough to have eye contact with my partner and actually say hi, not
Mm.
rushing to the next thing.
Mm.
Okay, success feels like not being so protective of my time that I'm avoiding seeing those friends that mean a lot to me, but I can't do it right now because I have to focus on this thing. So that reevaluation was a lot of like coming back into my own body, not like what is success out here in diplomas and degrees and career, but what does it feel like when I'm connected? What does it feel like when I'm slowing down enough? You and I have had conversations about like being wound up because you're trying to go, go, go. And then you exhale and it kind of feels like everything falls apart because you're
Mhm.
operating in these extreme
Binaries.
pendulums, binaries. Yeah.
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 We need, like you and I have talked about before, we need that like
Mm,
expansion and contraction in our system, in all of our kind of different aspects of of our system and our bodies to be well. And the stress of just trying to constantly strive and achieve more just puts us constantly in that contraction,
yes.
right? Um, and when we do expand, things naturally fall apart and fall down because we were holding too much. It wasn't meant to keep going in that way, right? And I think we put a lot of like negative valuations on that quote unquote kind of like falling apart, whereas it's like things just need to fall down and fall away, or they need to fall down to then be kind of readjusted and rejigged and figure out what do you pick up when, how do you sustain a juggling act that's not going to completely destroy your nervous system and your immune system and your mental health and your physical health, etc. Right? Like
Mhm.
we that's the kind of like we talk about people having a breakdown. It's like, oh my god, like oh my god, they had a breakdown, and I'm like, great, fantastic,
They
right? Like
expanded.
good. Yeah, they expanded. There's no new beginnings that can happen without an ending of some kind. And a lot of endings tend to involve some level of destruction,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
destruction might be a big word, but it could just be like things need not being able to continue in the same way or needing to fall away.
Yeah. And I find that like the dance, I guess, is like people from collectivistic cultures living in a more so individualistic culture. Like, I think boundaries is a really tricky subject to navigate for that reason. Like, again, success in some ways looks like having connection with my family, being,
Mhm.
open to influence from elders and vice versa. But I think from external eyes, the way I might relate to family looks like enmeshed, unboundaried. But really, it's I can't be separated from that belief system. Sorry, thinking about kind of balancing that line of coming from a collectivistic culture, living in an individualistic culture, and trying to figure out like what are my boundaries here,
Hmm.
right?
Like
And
in relationships, you mean?
in relationships, yeah, like, my spouse early on in our relationship might have seen that sense of obligation towards being there for family as a lack of boundaries. And, I think we can like there's probably people pleasing and guilt and obligation playing into that, but for the most part, like we just show up for each other.
Hmm.
There is that way of like dropping and showing up that I think to the external eye can look like not like having really porous boundaries. So in like trying to recover from burnout or recognizing I can't keep up, it's also what boundaries help protect me, and how do I want to define that in a way that actually honors who I am, my collectivistic nature, my
Hmm.
desire to be there for others, but then also recognize that there's this tendency to overextend. There's this tendency to push past that go, 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 go when you can't keep going anymore. It's like trying to define that in my own way has been such a journey, and I don't think it's ended now. It's long term.
I think it's an ongoing process for sure, right? And we are going to have different boundaries at different stages in our lives, in different relationships in our lives, with different aspects of our lives at different points in time. I think it's like a constant back and forth. Like it's like this like dance, right? With how interconnected we are to the people in our lives, but to our environment, to the planet, to everything that's going on geopolitically and economically, right? Like there's this like constant, I think, dance. It's hard to say like, okay, I figured out my boundaries
Oh
and
yeah.
this is it forever, right? Because if we do that, then actually we become very rigid and stagnant as well, right? We are not responding to the natural changes within ourselves and the world and our relationships and our environments. And I think that can actually be very confusing for folks and overwhelming for folks and then frustrating for folks because they're like, can you please just tell me what's the formula?
Yeah.
For the love of God, just give me the formula for whatever it is that's going on, but especially for like boundaries. Like
What am I
how to
supposed
figure
to
this.
say no to? Is what I
Yeah.
often hear.
Yeah. How do I practice this? Especially I think I had this conversation so much with my clients who are adult children of immigrants. And it's like we have to keep tweaking it, right? Because your circumstances are changing and the needs of the people around you and the expectations of you and what you need to kind of be addressing are changing. So we have to keep tweaking, right? There isn't a perfect answer. There isn't a perfect formula for how do you move through life. And I think maybe because as humans, we really hate uncertainty. We
Yeah.
just want an answer, myself included. I'm not going to pretend like I'm like, some sage who's just like, yes, I'm just flow through life perfectly. Right? Like we just want an answer because we want certainty because life inherently is so uncertain, right? And it's a practice to be able to be with the discomfort of that uncertainty.
Yes.
And it's not a skill set that most of us are taught and given the opportunity to cultivate from a young age because most of the people around us, our elders for multiple generations, didn't really usually have that. It's like it's very survival based, right? It's all in that kind of like contracted,
Yeah.
just keep going, stay in your room for 5 hours, don't drink water or pee, just study. Um, kind of an effort through life.
Yeah.
Um, but there isn't a perfect answer that we need to keep kind of flowing. And that's not me kind of like making like a bid for people always being in therapy or anything like that, right?
Yes. Yes.
Like a plug-in for therapy. Always have a relationship with your therapist. But it's nice to be able to have someone in your life who is particularly immediately outside of your life, so that what is happening is not going to like impact them, so that they don't necessarily have a stake in the
Mhm.
choices that you make. And it doesn't have to be a therapist. It could be whomever
Yeah.
that you really trust, that you've cultivated a connection with, who doesn't have a stake in the choice that you make. Whatever choice you make, whatever's happening in your life is not going to immediately impact them. To be able to use that connection, that space to talk through what's going on and readjust, make these tweaks
Yes.
to how you navigate through life and through your relationships and identities and etc.
Absolutely. Absolutely having that. Like, I think about my partner even where, like I was saying initially, if it was like, "Hey, it doesn't seem like you really wanna go to that event, but you feel really guilty, and that's making you wanna go." I think the clear-cut boundary, like you're saying with certainty, is just like, don't do things out of guilt. But then initially it was like, okay, I'm going to say no to things that make me feel that I'm doing just because I feel guilty. And then we tweaked that, we rejig that when it was actually like guilt. And maybe that's the word that I'm using for it in English, but there's another like sense of that word of connection to something bigger to you. And so if I wasn't engaging in, like if I wasn't choosing to go to that event that was for somebody else, then I was being selfish. And so the guilt was kind of tying in with being selfless for overriding what you need. And now I'm kind of in the spot with guilt where it's just a cue to me that there's something outside of me that's calling for
Hmm.
me, whether you want to call that obligation or values. But it's not the driving force anymore. It's not, I feel guilty, so I should. It's now like, ooh, I want to, I don't want to. There's a little bit of guilt around not doing it. And you play with it a bit more, like you're saying. And it's not just, I don't do things that I don't want to do.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Guilt is a interesting experience for sure, that I think guilt and shame come up in my conversations with clients all the time. And guilt and shame in particular, I think play a significant role when folks are trying to kind of do that balancing act between an individualist and a collectivist culture that they may have roots in. And, you know, they're both kind of natural emotions like any other emotion that we have. And what I talk to folks about is that whatever emotion you're experiencing has a message for you. It's just a messenger from within you. Let's see what it has to say. The message that it's sharing with you may or may not be accurately reflective to or applicable to the situation that's in front of you right now, but it has a message for you. And usually it's part of that system that's like scanning our environments and our relationships and our life and the choices that we're making in our bodies and minds, all of it, like our nervous system scanning all of this and looking for like patterns. So if it notices a pattern that's similar to a previous pattern, it's gonna like call up an emotion to give you a message about like, I noticed a pattern.
Hmm.
But what is that pattern? It's like, yeah, like you said, like we need to like sit with it a bit. We need to kind of work with it a bit, like talk to it a bit,
Yeah.
right? Like, and
Get
be
to
like,
know
what's
it.
your message right now, right? And then with our full adult self and our awareness of all the different factors, then determine like, okay, I respect this message. Is this message applicable to the situation I'm in right now? If I don't listen to this message, what will I gain? What will I lose?
Mhm.
And am I comfortable with that, with what I'm about to gain and lose at the same time?
Gain and lose. And it,
Hmm.
it, it is that dance. You're kind of facing, what am I putting down? What am I picking up right now? And you're developing a relationship with um that emotion, that messenger that, like we were talking about earlier, there's not a lot of space given to get those nuances, to ask those questions. But to be in a position now, I think that's pretty successful to be able to pause and slow down and ask that guilt or that obligation or that urge to hide who I am behind, sorry, to actually be able to release that, slow it down enough, ask myself that question: what are you trying to do here? How are you trying to help
Mhm.
me? And I think eh, when I think about barriers to success, it's when we're pulled so outside of us or when we're so occupied with everything else going on, which I think most of us are, that it does become really difficult to actually, it's not that we don't want guilt to come around, it's that when it does come around, can we connect with it and can we ask it questions, and then decide how we want to approach or move forward, knowing that that emotional messenger came. I
Mhm.
love that you brought that up.
Mhm. Yeah. I know you've mentioned your partners throughout. I'm wondering if there's some little nugget that you want to share about a challenge or an interesting moment that the two of you have had to balance in terms of kind of trying to integrate your different cultures and lived experiences.
Yes. So I mean, I think there's so many, as my partner is not from an immigrant background. His family has been here for in Canada for multiple generations, so they're settlers here. And I think one thing that stands out to me is like my concept of conservation and like avoiding waste. Um is like deeply influenced by my parents' childhood, like during the Iran-Iraq war, where there weren't a lot of supplies around. And my parents wouldn't have thought that their daughter, decades later, after their childhood of experiencing shortages, would be having a spat with their partner about the number of Kleenexes they used, because that lives in me. And so I guess like the challenging part is being able to open lines of communication around why things are important, why things that seemingly are unimportant feel viscerally important to your partner. So, for my partner to be able to say, all right, got it, that's why the tissues are throwing you off, that feels quite like affirming. And we've developed that communication to be able to know what's on there. And I think just communication in general is like, the differences in communication styles. Persians are quite, expressive and exaggerated, and I'm someone that's quite, like, hyperbolic in how I talk, and my partner is more soft-spoken. And so when I'm impassioned about something, and I know this isn't the first time a interracial couple is talking about this, but it can be seen as like too much or taking up too much space or whatever that might be. So I've also had to kind of learn how to invite my more soft-spoken partner into conversations if I'm more willing to take up space. And then I would say like values, having ongoing conversations about values has been one that's just so interesting. And I actually going to pause on that one because I feel like it's going to open a whole can of worms. But yeah, the biggest piece is how, my parents' experiences growing up and their experience of immigration lives within me and shows up in my partnership and in the here and now. And I think it is important for my partner to be able to acknowledge that that's not just an idiosyncrasy. There's more to it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I understand that. And I would imagine like for your partner's family kind of being in Canada and North America for multiple generations, they would have been here probably during the Depression era.
Mhm.
So some of these kind of responses around being conscious of not wasting things and um, being frugal or whatever, um, I think they could connect to in terms of what they may have heard from their own elders.
Mhm.
Um, but that may not be like a priority in the lives that they lived in the generation that your partner in particular is in. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it speaks to a bit of like that collectivism too, and the passing down that was possible. And I'm very lucky that with my family and generations above me, like there was so much lore passed down. Like we're constantly storytelling and communicating. And um, on my partner's side, there's this, he has multiple family members who are trying to capture all of that ancestry and understand what that looks like. There's a mapping out that's happening now. So it's
Mm.
just like different ways of relating to our heritage and
Mhm.
understanding that and recognizing the impact and how it shows up now.
Yeah. And also the wisdom
The
that's in it as well, right? Like, I think we forget that there are nuggets of wisdom that will become applicable to our lives. Like, we are going through such a significant time of change and transition across the world right now. Um, Geopolitically, economically, environmentally. Um, that I think we need to pool all of our different wisdom and knowledge across generations, across cultures and places to be able to navigate what's happening in a larger world that we're now all immersed in because of the impacts of globalization over the past like 30 plus years.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That, yeah, let's lean on each other's wisdom, that
Mhm.
collective wisdom.
So, with that said, if
Mhm.
there had been a guidebook for people who do partner with adult children of immigrants or immigrants in general, what is one piece of advice or wisdom that you would want included in it?
I think, like, in the most compassionate way, um, proximity to a person of culture isn't the same thing as doing the work, isn't the same thing as recognizing how your own positions of power and your intersectional identities show up in that relationship. And as well intended as you might be committed to unlearning, be committed to relearning, be committed to receiving feedback from your partner from an immigrant background, because I think it's in those conversations where just because you don't get it, it doesn't mean you can't get it.
Mhm.
It's in those conversations where your their own internalized racism can be, called in. And I don't mean it in the sense of like, um, you know, do all the work on your own and don't have conversations with your partner. I mean it in like, be open to that feedback. Your partner has lived experience just as you have lived experience, and both of your lived experiences are going to inform your perspectives and how you meet one another. And sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So
Mhm.
be willing to learn.
Yeah, which will involve, as you're mentioning, kind of like humility,
Humility.
patience, um, and like intentionality and a commitment to ongoing learning and growth and self-reflection and self-awareness,
Yes.
and a practice of compassion with oneself, but within a relationship and within a family that you have chosen to be a part of.
Yes. Yeah.
Partnerships are they're spaces for us to learn. Like, we choose our
Right.
partners whether we're conscious of it or not because we want to experience um, life through their perspective and their experiences. While there's something we're searching for on both sides, or if there's multiple partners together in a partnership, it's an opportunity to learn,
Yeah.
which means it's going to be uncomfortable for everybody at some point, which means there's going to be some conflict in one degree or another at some point. Yeah. And so, yeah, if you need more support, there are supports out there. There are folks that can hold the space for you individual, and there's then and also hold space for your partnership to do these explorations as well on an ongoing basis.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's beautiful when that learning can happen in the context of relationships. And like you said, we are constantly learning and growing, and to just meet each other with that humility, and our that we all have the capacity to do harm,
Hmm.
and to be able to acknowledge that, I think, is the first step in having effective conversations, safe enough conversations within your relationship about the challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And giving each other room to make mistakes,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Patience and cultural humility. I think that's that's the ingredient there.
Yeah. Well, Nikoo, thank you so much for being a guest on Grown Between Worlds and for sharing your story and your wisdom with us today.
Bruce, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot, I expressed a lot, and yeah, I'm really grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening or watching this episode of Grown Between Worlds. We're grateful to share this space and community with you.
Please follow or subscribe to our podcast, share it with people who might resonate, join our newsletter for more info and resources, leave us a comment if you'd like, and join us again for future episodes. And remember, your story matters, your voice matters, and you're not alone. Grown Between Worlds is sponsored by Forouz Salari Online Counseling and Consulting.